So, starting off with what has probably become a standard disclaimer by now. I'm still slightly sick. I've been sick and the video has been delayed as I keep getting sick. And so, if the audio's bad, you know the reasons. Anyway, the Crimson Echoes event has been announced for the English server release. And you know the deal by now. There is the normal mode, with a total of 6 maps. These of course have a hard mode. And then there's the EX stage. Now obviously it will be a nerfed version of the Japanese and Chinese server release. And while I had hoped that we would have the levels for these maps by now, it does seem that we've got no news on that right now. So yeah, maybe by the time this video goes up and is fully uploaded, they will have released that. I mean, that's what they did last time. But if you can do the Fallen Rings event and the Divergent Chessboard events, then you should be able to do this one. There is an event shop as per standard, and in that you can obtain Kaga. And really that's the only notable thing in the event shop. It'll be slightly different to the Chinese and Japanese server event shops because there's obviously no PR ships on the English servers, but beyond that it should be pretty much the same. And collecting the event currency will also allow you to obtain Makinami, and you just do that by collecting up all the points and things, and you will get yourself a free couple of copies of Makinami, as well as other items from the point collection. So yeah, there's also that gimmick going on. Everyone else is available through construction, though there is also a chance to get Hatakashi as a drop, and Kaga is both available as a drop and in construction. But realistically, Hatakashi is most likely to appear in construction anyway, and it's easier just to save for Kaga. The Siren Chaser mechanic is back, and you also get Sakura Empire ships joining in as wandering ships. So let's actually talk about the ships themselves, as really I think that's why we're all here. First, we have to talk about Hood. Hood has been the best battlecruiser in the game for a year and a half now. No other battlecruiser has come close. Scharnhorst class, Congo class, Dunkirk, all those ships were the best of the rest. And while they were above average in terms of battlecruisers, you know, if you were to add the battleships to the mix, they were decidedly average in terms of performance. But Hood herself, she stood out. Even amongst battleships, she was top tier. Due to her barrage putting down heavy damage, adding that reload buff, she was very nice to have around. So Hood has been the only battlecruiser worth getting and worth thinking about. Unless you were looking to play things on the safe side and obtain other battlecruisers, just in case further battlecruisers might be needed for the future, you know, she was the only one anybody really bothered with. And now a new contender enters the ring. We have a Maggie. First impressions is that she is incredibly PvP focused. She decreases enemy firepower, torpedo strength and air power by 9%, and that's only her first skill. Second skill reduces fire damage taken by the main fleet by 15% and increases evasion by 10%. And obviously evasion on the main fleet, that doesn't really mean much, but actually it increases the effective health, so that's quite a good boost. And on main ships, on capital ships where they have low evasion anyway, due to diminishing returns, it's going to be quite a boost. So that 10% evasion boost, that's going to be quite helpful and quite handy to have. So if you encounter her in PvP, you know you're going to have a bit of a hard time killing that fleet. you're going to be doing less damage to them, and the main fleet is going to be a lot tankier. So if you encounter in PvP, you know you're going to have a bit of a harder time killing that fleet. You're going to do a little bit less damage to them, and the main fleet has got a good bit tankier. But what if you're not on the receiving end? What if you're the one using her? Well then, your torpedo memes should stay alive just a little bit longer. And your Akaga, well, they should also last a little bit longer, just long enough to launch yet another airstrike and mess up the enemy. So in short, she's a team player. But we haven't talked about the best bit. Her best bit is the third skill. We have a Barrage skill that rivals Hood in terms of performance. 70% activation, damage scales on the skill level. The difference is she doesn't just offer a reload boost, but what she has is significantly better. If you have a fleet of 4 or more Sakura Empire ships, then the loading time of the first shot has been decreased by 45%. Let's put that in context. The best equipment for Hood is the Fire Control Radar from the Fallen Wings event. It reduces load time for the first shot by 15%. This skill is reducing it by 45%. This is like Akagi and Kaga's preemptive victory skill, and that allows them to get in that first airstrike 50% quicker than normal. And that would be fine on its own, except this is tied to a powerful barrage as well. It's 2 powerful skills all in one. And did I mention that it also fires out torpedoes? Yeah, it also fires out torpedoes. So this is a barrage skill to end all barrage skills, as you want to maximise them to get them to fire it off as quickly as possible, which is why you use the Fire Control Radar on Hood and go for a slightly faster gun than the slower, more powerful 406mm Mark 6 gun. And now take all of this and apply it to PvE, because it all works in PvE as well. So you may now ask, does she have any downsides? Well, she does have a low anti-aircraft stat, but that's hardly the end of the world. Her health pool isn't as high as Hood's, but does that matter? I mean, it's above average, and with those first 2 skills, that's going to help quite a bit with that regards. But if we're talking about stats, we should also talk about how she has the highest firepower amongst battle cruisers. She matches South Dakota in terms of raw firepower. It's that high. And also, let us not forget that she can actually equip light cruiser guns and not just destroyer guns as auxiliaries. At this point we have to say, freaking Hood, who is she? Except, well, that isn't exactly gonna be the case. Because there's one downside to a Maggie that Hood doesn't have, and that's usability. You can use Hood in any fleet. A Maggie, in contrast, requires you to build the fleet around her. And on the servers that have Nagato, the meta for Sakura fleets is still going to be heavily influenced by Nagato with Akaga. Although the stall fleets can be built around taking advantage of the Maggie, and while the Maggie does allow Sakura players to switch things up and use Nagato with the Maggie and Hyuga, the general lack of anti-aircraft there will be an issue, and there are other battleship backlines that can still exist and will be preferred as meta fleets. However, that all being said, Nagato isn't on the English servers, and any player that doesn't have Nagato will be instead welcoming a Maggie with open arms, because before Nagato, the ship of choice to pair with Akaga was Hood. But again, this still restricts your freedom, as you will be looking to build your vanguard around her as well. So Hood is universal and can be used everywhere, which makes it more useful. A Maggie isn't. Yet in her niche, if you're willing to build fleets around her, she does outperform Hood. So that's a Maggie. And yes, she is the must-get ship of the event. Which means we now have to talk about the other ships, and yeah, they are going to pale in comparison. So what can we say about Kaga? She gets compared to Tirpitz for obvious reasons. They both have over 7,000 health, both have 380 firepower, both have low anti-aircraft stats, both have torpedo stat of 188, their evasion stat is almost the same, being 20 and 21, they have the same reload stat, and they both have skills that fire out torpedoes. However, instead of a flat 30% damage boost, Kaga instead has a barrage of her own. This one is different to a Maggie's, it is instead what is known as a cross projectile barrage. Yeah. So, this is where I get to explain what that is. Rather than a mass of heavy shells being fired in the area in front, it's basically a small cluster of shells followed by a wave of bullets that move across the screen, much in the same way that Washington's barrage performs. There are, however, issues with this. First, the damage is reduced compared to the barrage that is found on a Maggie and Hoods. Second, unlike Washington's, the firing of this barrage is tied to the firing of the main gun, rather than being on a fixed timer. There are both pros and cons here. The pro is that you can select targets. The cons is that it's more of a wave clearer than a outright boss clearer, and you would normally want to use the 406 Mark 6 gun for extra power, but to activate the barrage you're pushed into using the 410mm gun, so yeah. Third, you have to get the skill to level 8 to get the full form of the barrage. And fourth, the chance to trigger it is only 50%. And that is really quite low for a barrage skill. It's not as bad as the Big 7 skill with its 40% chance to activate, but they are quite an outlier amongst the barrage skills. And then fifth and finally, the bullet part of a barrage doesn't even fully travel across the battle area. It cuts out 3/4 of the way across, which makes it worse than the Big 7 skill in terms of wave clearing barrages. So yeah, you start to see that there are a few issues with this barrage. So the reality is, I would have preferred a flat 30% damage boost on Kaga, and this means as much as you might like to think that she's comparable to Tirpitz, Tirpitz is the better ship, as she's got a more reliable and consistent performance, and you don't have to gear her around firing the main gun. So yeah, you can instead focus on maximising Tirpitz's damage, so she is going to be better. In my opinion, she's above average. She's better than the Big 7 battleships, but you will have a hard time convincing me that she's better than North Carolina or Tirpitz. She's clearly not as good as Washington, as Washington's barrage, while the same in what they do, Washington's is just superior. It has a better activation chance, and it's not tied to the main guns. That's not to say that people shouldn't rule her out totally, because she is of course Kaga, and that means a Kagi skill will still work if she's paired with her. And while normally I would prefer Kaga in the carrier form, certain maps such as hard modes and EX stages do limit you on the amount of carries that you can take, so this version of Kaga is useful, and while I'm sure that everybody already intends to get her, I do highly recommend getting her if you like running Sakura Empire flutes. So I guess we can now talk about Ashigara. Finally, the Miyoko class has a heavy cruiser that does it justice. The Hungry Wolf has arrived and she takes no prisoners. Well, let's be honest here. She's above average at best, and that's about it. She is significantly better than her sisters, but that's not saying much when you consider just how poor they are. And that's kind of crazy when you consider that historically they were quite good ships. When they were first built, they caused quite a bit of a storm. Everyone else took notice of them. Brimming with their large 8-inch guns, there was nothing quite like them at the time, so everyone else had to play catch up. So to actually have a Miyoko class that is usable is quite the step forwards. In terms of raw stats, she's above average. Not quite as good as the Takao class, but she's an elite ship, so she has scope for improvement if they decide to give her a refit. So is there any reason to sing her praises if she's just not as good as the Takao class? Well, her main skill means that every 20 seconds she has a 70% chance to boost her firepower by 20%, which pushes it beyond that of the Takao class. And normally that wouldn't be enough to talk about, but it also means that she's doing 20% extra damage against cruisers. All cruisers. And it lasts for 10 seconds. So there's a strong chance that this skill will be up for nearly good enough half the battle. This skill reminds me of two of the skills which are found on Ajax, Achilles and Exeter. Full firepower, which every 20 seconds has a 60% chance to increase the firepower by 40% for 10 seconds. And Giant Hunter, which increases the damage against heavy cruisers by 25%. Now, you can see clearly that these two skills are superior to Ashigawa's one skill. This is what happens when you have two separate dedicated skills, rather than trying to mold two skills into one. So now you see why she's barely above average, and where she fits in the overall picture. This does still make her usable, but there are better options. But if you like her design, then she still will perform well, as there are many other ships that fall on the gradient that are still capable. And that swiftly moves us on to Naca. So, the Sendai class generally has a low health stat, which is generally their main concern and makes them in general a glass cannon. They have an average firepower stat, and they won't win awards for their anti-aircraft stats, as it's just below average. They are squarely average in terms of their evasion and reload, but when it comes to the torpedo stats, that's where they shine. And when they get a refit, which they have been typically getting rather quickly, all those other issues start to fade away. Naca right now is pretty average. Yes, she has the superb torpedo stat that you would expect with the Sendai class, and she has the torpedo fleet skill that Sendai also has, which boosts the reload and torpedo stat of all light cruisers and destroyers in the fleet by 15%, and yes, that is a really good skill. But that's it, and it's not really enough to elevate her to being above average just yet. However, Sendai isn't available to the English service yet, and Naca is. Jinsu can be troublesome to obtain, and Naca is throwing herself at you. So, are there better ships? Yes. But let's see what a refit brings, and I will say get her because she could potentially become the next Jinsu with her refit. If you were to skip out on her and she became another Jinsu with a refit, you would kick yourself, so don't miss out on getting her. So while I'd love to say more about her, it's really her potential that just makes her so good and makes her one of the top ships of this event. We don't know what's going to come with that refit, and for that reason there's just not much more that can be said. But really, don't miss out on her, because it's that unwritten potential that just makes her so valuable here. So now I guess I have to talk about Hatakazi. So let's just get this out of the way. She doesn't have great stats. The Kamikaze class were an old class of destroyers that were pretty much deemed out of date and almost obsolete by the start of World War II by the Japanese, and as such they were mostly relegated to escorting convoys. As such, yeah, she's got mostly useless stats, But conversely, she actually doesn't have the most useless of skills. She's actually got a rather decent skill. And that actually stops her from just being relegated as just another trophy ship. When she's alive in the fleet, she reduces damage taken by the main fleet by 8%. And she'll also reduce the damage that she takes from destroyers and light cruisers by 10%. So she's defensive, and she's slow oil. And for some people that will be a good enough reason to use her. For others, they'll probably just turn to other options like Fortune. So, yeah. The reality is there are many valid reasons for you to decide not to get her and not to use her. And there are also some valid reasons as to why you would choose never to use her. There are certainly better ships out there, and more than that you can just easily skip over her and that would be not an issue. But anybody who likes to mix things up from time to time and likes to use different ships, then yeah, she is definitely usable and she's definitely not useless. And now I can't put it off any longer, but I'm going to have to talk about Makanami. And this pains me because Makanami could have been a decent destroyer. She had great potential, but she's below average in performance. There are definitely better destroyers out there. Instead, she's ended up just like her sister Kurashio, full of promise, but let down by a poor choice of skills. Raw stats put her around the level of Udachi and Noaki. She has a very high torpedo stat, above average health, average evasion, being on the respectable side of the scale, and average firepower and anti-aircraft stats. So again, we have another Sakura Empire ship that is all about the torpedo stats. And as a second skill is chain torpedoes, she's playing to those strengths. While the skill is fairly standard now and not all that special, it can be good if it's backed up by another strong skill. But that's not what happened here. Her first skill is what let her down, as it's a 60% chance every 20 seconds to increase firepower by 40% for 10 seconds. Considering she has a flatly average firepower, this is hardly impressive, and it's not even boosting her to the top of the table. Instead, it just gives her respectable levels of firepower. And are we really expected to get excited by that? No. It would have been better to continue playing to her strengths, rather than giving her a skill that would have very little effect or benefit for her. You can see where they were going with this though. You can't help but look at her skill set and be reminded of Takao. But if they were actually to give her Takao skills, it would have been better, as double damage is far more preferable than a minor boost that adds a few extra damage points to each shot. These destroyer skills that increase firepower by a certain percentage for the most part are useless. Unless the skill is on a ship where their firepower is already high enough that they can actually take advantage of it, otherwise you see what you get here. The boost is not enough to be meaningful, and it's a wasted skill. You might as well choose a destroyer that has a naturally higher level of firepower and has more fitting skills, rather than to choose a destroyer that has a low rate of firepower and a skill that boosts that firepower in line with the destroyer that you could have passed over. Kurashio has the exact same skill and the exact same problems. Decent stats with a heavy focus on torpedoes, and yet given one standard skill to put any of that into action. When the skills are done right, you get Kaguru. When done wrong, you get this confused mess. Of course, this doesn't make her totally useless, just a frustrating mess of missed opportunities. She still has decent stats and one decent skill. Overall, this leaves her in the realms of the subpar and decidedly below average, when she could have been potentially above average if given better skills. So, that rounds it up for the discussion of these ships. As you can see, we've got an interesting bag of ships this time round. We've got two ships that are good to go and can be used straight away, and one ship that is worth getting for the future potential. The rest can be summed up as, get them if you want them, get them if you like them. They're certainly not essential ships like Kamagi, Kaga or Naca, but they are also certainly not absolutely useless or just trophy ships either. So anyway, that's it for now, and yeah, leave a subscribe if you want further content, and drop a like if you enjoyed the video.